So I have good news. I actually got promoted to full professor, and I'm the first woman in my department to do it. So I'm pretty stoked about that. So I don't go to any meetings anymore. I'm surprised you're even seeing me. I'm not sure if you guys would be interested in this, but I thought I would share with you a little mini history of the watershed we're at right now before talking about my work. Does that sound like something you'd be interested in? And this was part of a project that I did, an ongoing project. It's called Water California, and it's a project that's about the history of water in California. I was invited to do this project. Now, if I had known the history of water in California, I never would have said yes. It's like so huge and complicated. But so this is on the website, and I'll show you that website in a few minutes. So I'll just show you some sketches I did. I went outside and sketched, and all of the science illustration people will take heart in the rudimentary nature of these sketches done by a professional artist. So that's the name of the project. So the American Nile, 155 miles long, running mostly underground. The Salinas River flows north like the Nile. Traveling along the Santa Lucia Mountains, it connects missions, abandoned military bases, vineyards, prison towns, the big ag of the nation's salad bowl, a power plant, a fishing village to the Monterey Bay. The topsoil it deposits is 17 feet thick and black, the richest in the world. Its path used to be known as El Camino Real. Now it's called the 101 from San Luis Obispo. Exit at Salinas, take the 183, drive towards the enormous smokestacks, and then steer into the water. Watch for otters. The river reaches the bay twice with 2 engineered mouths. The southern mouth arrives directly from Castroville, the artichoke capital of the world, in a channel that begins beside the apparition of 7 drained lakes, now full of agriculture and train tracks. The lakes nearly appear in the rain. Here, puddles are ghosts of lakes. The channel here is straight and was cut in 1917 to prove a point. Reclamation, reclaiming water from the wildness of nature for the purpose of irrigation, to manifest, to move west, and then to stay still. The northern mouth at Moss Landing leapt out of its cement channel during the earthquake of 1906. The water pools at the feet of the giant power plant and is sucked through pipes into the bay. Moss Landing is in the Gavilan watershed, where ditches are ghosts of creeks. Fremont Peak, the origin of the creeks, catches the water from the sky and slows off the unusual soil. First farmed by the Ohlone Indians, the watershed became ranch land. The Salinas Valley was without fences, and the animals roamed the grasslands. In the early 1800s, the cows were led to the beach and slaughtered in the sand. Their hides became the belts that spun through the gears of the Industrial Revolution. Once gold appeared in the hills, the cows and cattle shifted to the foothills of the Sierras, and the Yankees founded Salinas, intended as a Jeffersonian city of agricultural innovation. The riparian lands and lake beds were drained by Chinese and then Japanese laborers. The watershed transformed into a geometric network of rows framed by shining creeks and rivers, redirected into fallows and channeled into ditches. The Gavilan watershed has been shaped by wars. The Indian Wars and the silent war of colonialism dislocated the watershed's earliest civilization. The Mexican Revolution brought ranchers. The Great War brought the technology of mass production, the richest crop in memory. Salinas overflowed with prosperity. Trains carried the water from the Gavilan in the forms of lettuce, fish, and sugar beets and ice across the nation. With World War II came the chemical revolution, and the row crops ruled the watershed. Pesticides transformed the ecology and biology of the Gavilan. 1 million soldiers passed through adjoining military bases throughout the 20th century. The base outlawed the removal of invasive plants in order to halt erosion. The soldiers remember the training, the fog, and the fields of ice plants overwhelming everything. With the giant clay pipes of the Bureau of Reclamation, the water and agricultural chemicals of the creeks of Salinas were channeled into irrigation ditches. Carved along the sides of roads through backyards and industrial areas, the creeks are isolated by mud and concrete walls. Most people have forgotten their names: Gavilan, Natividad, Alisal, and Santa Rita. The Return of the Natives, a native plant advocacy group for the Gavilan watershed, has declared war on weeds, reappropriating the advertising slogan used to sell Dow chemical pesticides. The group attacks ice plant with native grasses that keep the topsoil in place and clean the creeks with their roots. Naming the creeks is their greatest weapon. In a county controlled by ag, a ditch is a useful, dirty, sometimes deadly thing. Defining a ditch as a creek calls out to wild longing. This would not be the first change of language since the Bureau of Reclamation and the Army Corps of Engineers set out to manage the water of their West. So an 1800 definition of conservation is to ensure that not a drop of water reaches the ocean without being put to human use, right? And this is an 1800 definition of reclamation, to reclaim the rich topsoil submerged under the lakes and other bodies for human use, and to harness water for irrigation and development. So this is kind of how, I guess, in a way, a historical understanding intersects with the science understanding of what's happening with the ecology of this area, right? And pretty much, I think when I look around the landscape here, I can see the entire history of the United States and of early Mexico and of the landscape before. And through this transition is how we're going to see the broad impact of our society. Knowing that you guys, many of you are going to be applying for NSF grants someday because you're graduate students, I wanted to talk about a piece of the NSF grant application that's called Broader Impacts. And they say that that this is a really important part of getting a National Science Foundation grant. However, they don't really know how to define it yet. So I've done some work in this area and I want to share it with you. The project that I just talked to you about is this website called Water California. And I can actually click here and it'll open up. And if you go to the website, you can, let's see, the cursor goes there. You can scroll around and there'll be different stories by 22 different artists about things that are happening in the history of Los Angeles and water. You can also go to a timeline of water in California that I wrote, which was the hardest thing I've ever written. And you can see videos that are also films of the timeline of water in California, which are animated archival materials. As part of this project, which is really kind of a science communication project, it's really artists interpreting really complex scientific ideas, kind of going beyond the illustration of the watershed, but going into kind of really talking about scientific concepts like how do we deal with, how can we catch fog, and use it as water in the Mojave, things like that, and that's down here. It became a museum exhibition called Liquid Assets, Perspectives on Water, and that was in the Crocker Museum, which is in Sacramento. Have any of you ever been there? Yeah, it's really, have you been there since the renovation? It's pretty amazing. So this was their first community-based exhibition. And what we did was we asked a bunch of artists to come up with definitions of different terms of water. And then we talked, and then below are pieces of the timeline of what those terms mean throughout the history of California water. So you can go on to Tumblr and see this as a Tumblr dictionary, but you could actually walk through this room and it was all these different artists creating interpretive materials. Outside we had a festival of water and about 1,200 people came. This was the Watershed Taste Testing Bar. Yeah. This was a project for children that was created outside, just trying to get children interested in water. You know how children love drains? It's like really fascinating. You can probably remember being a child and trying to get stuff out of the drain. So they actually there's this big drain in the middle of the courtyard in the museum, and so we created a big project with it so the kids could learn about water and things flowing here would be flows to the bay, but things flowing to the Sacramento River and the Delta.
What was the project?
Water California. There was also a sing-along, water-themed, by a musical band called the Shade Chasers for children. And so that went on for quite a while. That was really fun. And then everyone who went through this whole project, at the end, they took an oath and they were given a badge that they were sworn to be protectors of water. So it was a really successful project. And there were several stations I haven't shown you pictures of, just to save time, but it was like a really exciting and neat community project. In the museum world, this is called participatory art. The Crocker Museum had never done a project like this before, so when we first heard from them about delivering the artwork, They said, "So will everything be in frames?" And we said, no, actually, we're going to try and involve the audience and engage them in learning about these concepts so that they have a good time. This is another interpretive exhibition that I put together at the Hayward Shoreline Interpretive Center. It was on sea change, or we used to say sea level rise, but now we know that it's also going to be sea level lower in some areas, so we say sea change. In the back, you can see those orange life preservers. There are people who went out in the flats of the Hayward Shoreline Interpretive Centers in this big flat area, kind of industrial area south of San Francisco, and they stood out there in these life jackets holding these poles that showed what the water level would be in 2050, just stood out there for people to see. And a lot of other artist projects, and it was I realized that my role as an artist became to make these interpretive signs that showed what the sea level change would be at the Hayward Shoreline Interpretive Center over the course of years. And this, of course, was like now considered really conservative because this was 5 years ago, and now it's gotten dramatically worse. So this is where we are right now. But this is like 8 years ago, what people said it would be like in 2100. Now we're talking more, sooner than that, unfortunately. So right now we're underwater in this map, right? You can see Moss Landing up there. And I painted a series of these for First Night Monterey. And again, it was kind of like, these aren't museum projects, these are more projects that are in the community. At First Night Monterey, 2,200 people came through this project, and it looked like a series of paintings that look like this, that look really beautiful. People thought they were jellyfish. And then they came up to them and they were like, oh my God. And I was like, yes, where do you live? Seaside? You'll have beachfront property soon. It's kind of like, how do you get people to address these kind of issues that are pretty urgent without alienating half your audience? So when I did this show at the Hayward Shoreline Interpretive Center, I was told to curate, as you curate the show, you may not use the term climate change or global warming, because if you use those terms, a lot of your audience just has a different set of information about those terms than many of us share, and so it causes them to kind of just turn off their brains. So that's a really interesting problem. So in this case, this is in my home community, and I really wanted people to think about sea change. And so the other piece I had was this wax sculpture, which I'm trying to fix with a blowtorch while my daughter is like horrified, and that's in my studio. And it's a sculpture of our watershed again, the one I just was telling you about. And we took this with the paintings to the Portola Plaza Conference Center, where all the people would be walking through. And that's my father-in-law there. He studied up so he could present to people what would happen as sea level rise, and people inundated that sculpture with sprayed water. So you can see they're all spraying it with water. And then there's an easel right in the foreground, and those are those paintings of mine that were all around it. I'm a classically trained artist. So, I'm trained to sort of make work that hangs in very pristine museum settings where people stand back and try to look incredibly smart while they gaze at it. So this is a real departure from what we imagine. But it's a lot more fun, I think. And it's kind of where art meets science communication, meets activism. So that's also in my studio, and I wanted to show you guys this project that I just did for our local community for the museum through the Irvine Foundation. And that's a painting of, Monterey. It's unfinished in that picture. And what it became was this website for the Monterey Museum of Art. Let me see if I can. Called Monterey Places, which you can go and visit. And actually, I think it came out really beautifully. And so it works two different ways. And this just came out last year, and it was a lot of work. Because what happened was I went through the Monterey Museum of Art's collection, and they have a bunch of paintings of local places. And I researched the paintings, and a lot of them are kind of obscure. And then I also researched the environmental and social histories of them. So some of them are, so at first I wrote this very kind of more art historical history of each painting, and I showed it to my husband, who's sitting over there. He's a writer. And I was like, what do you think? And I was watching him read it, and he literally went like this. And then he went, and then he said, some of this is kind of interesting. So I rewrote it. And I really tried to think about what's a fun, easy way to understand this stuff. So I did add in anytime there's a painting of a adobe where a bandit had lived, I would write that. But also there's little stories about the Carmel Dunes and the black legless lizards. And then you can actually, if you want to see where that is, drag that guy over and sort of look at it. And it's all there. So there's that way to navigate the website. And then you can also, so you can imagine that's a lot of work. It's actually 100 pages of writing. And then the other way to, are you a sign language interpreter? So then the other way to navigate the website is here's that painting. And it's actually animated. And you can look at you can look at the different paintings this way and look at the histories of them. And so the idea was that it was also an exhibition in the museum where you could go around with an iPad, or it works on your phone. And so you can actually be out in the community and be somewhere and they'll take you to a painting of where you are from, mostly the 1800s, or you can be in the museum and look at it on the thing and then look at a picture of it now. So that's a really fun new project, which I've actually never talked about publicly before. So ta-da! So here we are. So check it out on, in your free time, sometime, maybe. Okay, so that's that. So that's the finished painting on the website. And so I try to get my students interested in doing this, walking around and looking at stuff too. And this is one of my classes. If you're a CSUMB student, you'll see us wandering the campus. And what we're trying to do is look at the ecology. We might be talking about the ice plant. We'll talk about how prisoners of war created that footing of that building that we're walking in the middle of. We usually try to find relics inside it. And then they go on to make films that are about the history and ecology of the Fort Ord area. And so I'll have the link here where you guys can check out their films. And a really exciting thing is a lot of their films are going to show at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. in March as part of the Environmental Film Festival in D.C. But they're going to show in conjunction with, I have 2 current projects. This would be a good time for me to officially announce for the first time my retirement from curating. I'm going to be just focusing on making my own work. So all those big shows I did, I'm taking a little break because except for the Philip Glass thing, I'm going to keep doing that because that's a lot of fun. But no more museum shows for a while. What I am working on is this continued project, which I hope you guys will check out. It's called Planet Ord. This is the website interface. And you can go to this actual website and see on it, oh, it went. Thanks, Olive. And you can actually go into different areas of the Fort Ord military base. I sorted them by their electromagnetic field danger levels based on a ghost hunting kit that I bought, which I thought would be funny, but was not funny at all. Super scary. And documented about 1,000 soldier murals that were inside the abandoned buildings. These are painted by soldiers. I'm not going to show if there's a film, but I'm not showing it right now. And also it talks about the military base and the overall ecology of Fort Ord, which is the Superfund site and national monument and a really complicated place. And these are all images from that website. So you can go to the website and see it. From that, the Library of Congress invited me to work on collecting veteran stories. And so me and my students created a pilot program of collecting homeless veteran stories on Fort Ord. We did that, and so some of those stories are going to be featured also with the environmental film. So kind of the metaphor, as you can see in this image and can imagine, of the experience a lot of these veterans have with the unsustainable nature of our society that Fort Ord, I think, exhibits. We have a whole city that's completely abandoned. So this image duty kind of says it all for me. So right now it's a feature film I'm working on. And I'm also working on a new project that's based in Richmond, Virginia. And it's about the Shockoe Bottom area, which is, this is a painting I did of this little area that is a burial ground, it's the African burial ground because Richmond was kind of the center of the slave trade of the United States. And so I'm working with some activists there, and we're creating a graphic novel and animation series about that place and telling the untold stories of the Richmond area, including the Confederate spies who were these enslaved women who were servants in the Confederate White House and fed secrets to the Union Army and helped defeat the Confederacy. So stay tuned. So that's kind of where my work is right now, and I wanted to give you guys access to these URLs if you'd like to check them out. And also, you can email me. I get about 300 emails a day, so if you don't hear back, just email again. So that's what I wanted to say with all of that is, for me, the intersection of history and ecology is really exciting and important and can be really liberating and create social change. Thank you.